Welcome, everyone. Okay, let's just dive right into this explainer because there is an absolutely massive regulatory shift happening in the global carbon markets by 2026. We're talking about moving from a loosely connected, kind of Wild West voluntary ecosystem right into a highly regulated, digitally tracked, and strictly sovereign controlled era. So today, we're going to map out exactly what you need to know about the new carbon credit export rules and the real world impact of the 2026 framework. So picture this. It's December 31st, 2026. What exactly happens to your carbon credits on that date? Well, this date marks the absolute, literal, legal termination of the legacy Kyoto Protocol's Clean Development Mechanism, or CDM. For project developers and investors out there, this means billions of legacy credits face administrative cancellation if they aren't successfully migrated over to the new framework. We are officially transitioning to the Paris Agreement's crediting mechanism, or PAC, established under Article 6.4. The grace period is ending, and the new rules are incredibly strict. Now, under this new centralized UN-led mechanism, host countries hold absolute sovereign power over every single carbon unit's destiny. It's a fundamental shift. When a carbon project generates emissions reductions, a crucial step has to happen. A country must actively decide if those reductions will be authorized for export for compliance purposes or if they're going to be kept domestically. You literally can no longer bypass the host nation's climate accounting. Now, don't worry about the complexity here because we're going to break this down. Our roadmap today covers 6 key areas: the 2026 carbon market shift, roles of governments, ICPs, and developers, carbon credits versus ITMOs, 3 authorized use cases, tracking, reporting, and syncing, and finally, we'll wrap up with a project developer authorization checklist. All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the 2026 carbon market shift. Let's look at the hard deadlines driving this transition, because these are non-negotiable. January 1st, 2025 is the vital reference start date for new domestic mechanisms, like India's carbon credit trading scheme. Basically, projects must start after this date to ensure no retroactive crediting happens. Then, we hit June 30th, 2026. That is the deadline to secure approval from a country's designated national authority, or DNA, to migrate your legacy projects. If you miss that, you hit a literal brick wall on December 31st, 2026, when the Kyoto CDM officially terminates. These dates are strict filters to make sure only projects delivering permanent, verifiable mitigation actually enter the new registry. Moving on to Section 2, roles, governments, ICPs, and developers. This new framework delegates all the heavy lifting across 3 main players. It's like a highly coordinated dance. First, you have government agencies acting as the gatekeepers. They authorize the cooperative approaches and apply the corresponding adjustments to their national ledgers. Second, we have independent crediting programs, or ICPs, think Vera or Gold Standard. They handle the technical certification and actually issue the credits on their registries. And finally, private developers. You are the boots on the ground, executing the projects and handling the rigorous monitoring and reporting. Everyone has a highly distinct set of primary duties to guarantee transparency. Now you might be wondering, why even involve independent crediting programs at all in a sovereign system? Well, by leaning on established ICPs, governments instantly unlock massive administrative efficiency gains. Instead of trying to build these complex verification infrastructures from scratch, nations just rely on frameworks that already exist. It drastically reduces the bureaucratic burden for governments, it uses processes that developers are already familiar with, and crucially, it often grants built-in recognition for international compliance markets like CORSIA for airlines. So it's really about achieving a high integrity without sacrificing speed. Which brings us to Section 3, carbon credits versus ITMOs. You really need to think of this as a strict 2-ledger system. On one hand, you have tradable carbon credits, which are managed on ICP registries with unique serial numbers. This is the actual financial asset that you can hold, buy, and sell. But conversely, you have ITMOs, internationally transferred mitigation outcomes. These exist entirely on the accounting level. They are recorded by countries in their national registries to reflect authorized transfers. So simply put, one is the physical asset and the other is the national accounting math. Because of this split, accurate and continuous digital data communication between these 2 layers is absolutely vital to reduce the risk of inconsistencies in international climate reporting. When credits are issued, transferred, or retired over in the unit transaction layer, the host country's ITMO accounting layer has to know about it instantly, so it can record the ITMO and apply a corresponding adjustment. This constant, flawless syncing is what officially eliminates double counting on the global stage. All right, Section 4, 3 authorized use cases. So once a credit exists, what can it actually be used for? Under the new Paris Agreement rules, a host country can specifically authorize a mitigation outcome for one of three distinct use cases. First, for use towards another country's nationally determined contributions, or NDCs, meaning you're helping another nation hit its climate target. Second, for international mitigation purposes, the prime example here being the CORSIA scheme for international aviation. And third, for other purposes, which is generally a catch-all for voluntary corporate net zero commitments. The big takeaway here is that the host nation dictates the exact use case right at the point of authorization. And this ties perfectly into cooperative approaches under Article 6.2. These are voluntary bilateral cooperations that allow two nations to trade ITMOs smoothly. For instance, say Japan helps fund a massive solar array in India. Through a cooperative approach, that specific project gets linked directly to national accounting identifiers. This allows the resulting carbon reductions to seamlessly shift from India's ledger over to Japan's ledger, directly assisting Japan in meeting its NDCs. Because of this, we get a stark digital bifurcation for every single credit generated. If a host country authorizes a unit for international transfer, it becomes an AER, an authorized emission reduction. It leaves the country, and the host nation must legally deduct this volume from its own national accounts. That's a corresponding adjustment. However, if the country refuses international authorization, it becomes an MCU, a mitigation contribution unit. MCUs stay domestic. They help the host country meet its own targets and can only be sold in voluntary markets as non-transferable assets. Okay, moving to Section 5, tracking, reporting, and syncing. Listen, the days of loose spreadsheet tracking, those are completely over. Countries and ICPs are now locked into an intense, automated annual reporting process to the UNFCCC. They have to accurately track and report all authorizations granted, the exact millisecond of first transfer is executed, and ensure that the matching corresponding adjustment is mathematically applied. On top of that, countries have to submit incredibly detailed biennial transparency reports, or BTRs. The whole point is that any corresponding adjustment on a national ledger can be flawlessly traced all the way back to the original verified emission reduction project. But wait, because there is a literal physical cost to playing in this new market. The centralized Article 6.4 system automatically skims off a 7% total levy at the exact moment of issuance. 5% is the share of proceeds, which is immediately sent to the UN Adaptation Fund to help vulnerable nations. Another 2% is for overall mitigation of global emissions, meaning those credits are automatically and permanently canceled. So you only ever get 93% of the tradable credits you actually generated. The system forces a net atmospheric drawdown, which officially moves us past the old era of one-to-one neutral offsetting. Finally, let's look at Section 6, the Project Developer Authorization Checklist. Let's make this highly actionable. First, if you're working within new frameworks like India's CCTS, you've got to ensure your project start date is post-January 1st, 2025. Second, you must pass intense third-party validation through agencies accredited under strict ISO standards. Third, and this is urgent, you must secure your host country's DNA approval before that looming June 2026 deadline if you are migrating legacy projects. And fourth, you must ensure that digital authorization is conveyed securely to your ICP. Basically, if you fail to hit these rigorous additionality, validation, and authorization milestones, your project simply will not survive the transition into the Article 6.4 era. Which brings us to our final thought. How will you adapt to a carbon market where atmospheric contributions are no longer just voluntary, but entirely mandatory? As we move past that era of neutral offsetting and step into a deeply managed global registry system dictated by sovereign powers, the rulebook has completely changed. The real question for everyone watching is how quickly you can align your operations, your project development, and your accounting strategies with these rigid but highly structured new realities. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I hope this provided the clarity needed to navigate the 2026 carbon market shift.